Here we go. Rock and Roll Book Club for Tuesday, the 3rd of May, 2022. Yes, we're into May already, and I guess this is kind of exciting because this, I think, is like the 10th edition of the Rock and Roll Book Club, which makes this kind of cool that I've actually managed to keep this going this long. So, just as a bit of housekeeping before I go ahead with tonight's book, just to let you know, we have three more books coming up in the spring and summer series. I'll be taking a bit of a hiatus during July and August because I've got holidays and I got a bunch of other stuff I want to work on, including a whole stack of books over there that do not have anything to do with rock. Well, tangentially, I suppose. You could say they could be connected to rock, but they're not rock books. Anyway, so just to let you know that the next couple of weeks we've got coming up on May 17th, Gods of the Hammer by Jeff Pevier, June 7th, Girl in a Band by Kim Gordon, and June 21st, Dirty Windshields by Grant Lawrence of the CBC. So that's just a little bit of housekeeping going ahead. So nothing during July, nothing during August. I'll see how my vacation plans pan out for. Sorry, this thing's getting out of focus again. Oh my God, I hate it when it does this. So we will not be having Rock and Roll Book Club, or at least I won't be having it during July and August, but we'll be back hopefully the beginning of September, depending on how my holiday plans work out, because of like my real job, we still don't know what's happening with that. And anyway, here's a question for you for tonight's edition of Rock and Roll Book Club. And I ask this in all seriousness because I know this is something that a lot of people have struggled with during the pandemic. What do you do when the image that you've had of yourself turns out not to be who you actually are? Now, that seems very philosophical and very deep, but I know during the pandemic, the whole thing of putting the world on stop for about 2 years has given a lot of people pause and made them reflect on this. And this is also the central idea behind tonight's book for the Rock and Roll Book Club, which is Beautiful Scars by Tom Wilson, ex of Junkhouse, current member of Blackie and the Rodeo Kings. They've got a new album coming out fairly shortly, and also known as Lee Harvey Osmond. Imagine that you grow up in a family and, things have always been a little rough. You're in a kind of rough situation in a rough part of town, in a rough town, but you make do, you move ahead, you try and get by as soon as you can. But there are always these whispers in the background of like, well, maybe this and maybe not that. And it just sort of destabilizes you enough that it's always there, like kind of like an existential earworm in the back of your head, but it's not there enough that you can't move on ahead with your life just as it is. And that's the central thesis behind Beautiful Scars, which is Tom Wilson's story about finding out who he was as a human being. Now, this is really hard to talk about in a lot of ways because I can't say one thing or I will bring the whole house of cards down, but I'll paint the picture in very, very general terms. He grows up in Hamilton. His father, George, is a blind veteran from the Second World War who has a kiosk in Hamilton's train station. His mother, Bunny, is a housekeeper with a pretty flexible, let me just say, she's got a very flexible approach for dealing with the various problems of life. She is no stranger to fun. She's probably, got a bit of, something going on in her own past. And Tom grows up in this town during a time when Hamilton was really going through this big push for artistic things and for music. You had bands like Crowbar coming out. You had Teenage Head. You had Simply Saucer. All these bands that are coming up. And Tom gets swept up in that vortex, forming a band called the Florida Razors. And the whole thing just gets taken off like a big old tornado. And in that way, that sort of craziness of his upbringing kind of loops into the craziness of the rock and roll lifestyle as he progresses on. And of course, inevitably, with a lot of rock and roll stories, there are issues with drugs, there are issues with alcohol. But it's not until about 10 years ago that the whole truth starts coming out about who he is. And what his actual story is, not just to his nuclear family, but to his core family as well. Finding out that, in fact, he is Mohawk, that he's originally from Kanawake, excuse me. My mistake, and I don't know who's calling, but I bet it's related to the election somehow. All of a sudden, it's like this whole history, this whole other branch of the family starts opening up. and who he thought he was growing up turns out to be, yes, it's true, that's who he is, but then there's all this other richness of his life that he's discovering and he's now incorporating into his art. And one of the things I loved about this book is that it is told in very episodic, episodic ways, much like the Viv Albertine book from a couple of weeks ago. It's this is what happened at this point in time. This is what happened at this point in time. And like Liz Phair, Tom Wilson is not sparing about his own behavior and the own ways that he owns up to his shit. And it's refreshing to see, because it's a story that very much could have been spun, but it's not. It is, listen, this is just what happened. This is who I was. This is who I am now. And again, this is really hard to talk about in a lot of ways because I don't want to give away the plot, because the plot is so fascinating. You have to read this book. Or if you're not into the idea of reading the books and you love music documentaries, the Hot Docs Festival down in Toronto is currently carrying, I know they had the premiere of it last night, and I think the next showing, for those of you who are down in the GTA, the next showing of the documentary is actually going to be on Thursday night, May 5th. This I can't wait to see it, this very richly told biography that talks about this whole idea of the self and creation and who we are, and what we think we know about ourselves when we're growing up really doesn't compare to what we find out about our family histories and ourselves and our backgrounds and the trauma behind our backgrounds as well as we get older. So it is an engaging read. I'm not kidding. It's published by Anchor Canada. At least the paperback version that I have is published by Anchor Canada. It's about 223 pages. You will blow through it in an afternoon, I swear. This is one of the most engaging, funny, generous, engaging, and yet ultimately uplifting reads books that I've read in a while, be they memoirs, nonfiction books about rock and roll. Ultimately, what's so engaging about this book is that it is so uplifting. It is about finding your true self and being able to live through that true self, through your art, and not looking necessarily at yourself as where you thought you were, and that's a stopping point, but then realizing that there's so much other richness out there that you've got to explore, which, if there's one good thing that comes out of the pandemic, I hope it's that. I hope it's that idea that a lot of us who got into creative things or started to undertaking creative endeavors during the pandemic, we were able to discover these other sides of ourselves. Not that I'm trying to hitch my wagon onto Tom Wilson's by any means, please. But this is one of the best books about rock and roll. It's one of the best books about Canadian rock and roll that I've read in a really long time. So again, that's Beautiful Scars by Tom Wilson, paperback published by Anchor Canada. And something I forgot to mention about the documentary is that for those of you who are not in the Greater Toronto area, but who are located in Canada, you can buy a festival pass for the Hot Dog, or you can buy an online ticket for the Hot Docs Festival's showing of this thing. And I think it's on until next, I'm sorry, I should have checked this, but I think it's actually, you can buy the ticket and see it up until next Saturday. You buy the ticket, you've got the code to get in there, and then you've got 48 hours after you begin watching it to actually finish it, or watch it again, whichever you like. And hopefully, fingers crossed, TVO here in Ontario did partially fund the production of the documentary. So with any luck, it'll show on TVO in the next little while, which is great because TVO has had a lot of really, really good music documentaries in the last couple of years. They showed the Triumph one, I think 2 months ago. It's on the PVR. I don't even know what the hell day it is. Was it for Rock and Roll Book Club? I wouldn't know where the hell we are in the month, really. They showed the documentary about Triumph. There's the Great Vinyl series about why people collect records. And you knew this was leading up to it, didn't you? Gods of the Hammer, the excellent, and it's still available on YouTube and through the TVO website. That I did check. Picture My Face, the excellent documentary on Teenage Head. Also, like I forgot to say, this is Hamilton month here at Rock and Roll Book Club. And so if you haven't had a chance to read the book, it's still in print in spite of having been released almost 10 years ago. This is Gods of the Hammer by Jeff Pevier, who actually started out, neat little Ottawa anecdote, I think he was studying journalism here at here in Ottawa at Carleton, and he used to be the movie reviewer at Shay 106 when Shay didn't suck, basically, and still played really good music and like lots of new Canadian music. So picture my face you can still see through TVO's website or through YouTube. Definitely worth watching, but I'll tell you the last third of it, get the Kleenex out. Because that is really moving, and sometimes it's a little hard to watch, but it's worth it in the end. And God's the Hammer, the ultimate love letter to one of the best and most underrated bands. And I'm a total stan, so I can't be objective about this, because this is actually for me was one of the highlights of the pandemic, was rediscovering Teenage Head and realizing just how much I loved the music from that era and loved their music as well. So that's going to be the second book in Hamilton month. So May 17th, again, Teenage Head. June 7th, Kim Gordon, Rock Girl in a Band, and Grant Lawrence's Dirty Windshields on June 21st for the summer solstice. And then I'm not going to read anything on rock and roll for probably at least another 6 weeks, because I have a whole bunch of books on behavioral economics and history that I've bought and just haven't gotten to. So again, that's it for this week. That's it for Beautiful Scars. Again, for those of you who are in Ontario, if you don't want to buy the book, definitely check out Interlibrary Loan, because if your local library doesn't have it, your local librarian will know how to obtain a copy of it for you through Interlibrary Loan. So that's it for me for this week, Tuesday, May 3rd, 2022. See you in 2 weeks' time for Teenage Head. Read on, rock on, stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.